who has joined us for this really exciting skill session. I do want to highlight that this skill session is being brought to you because there are amazing Black law students at Loyola who asked for it to happen. They really wanted for their colleagues in school and other attorneys as we move forward to have a certain set of skills in understanding what it means to have Black community as clients and colleagues. And so I am really lucky to have law clerks with me that have been working with me since this summer, and I got some new ones this semester. And we put together what I think is an incredible presentation to you guys on racial justice advocacy. So we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it. And there we go. So just to give you guys an overview of what we're going to do today, we're going to learn how to advocate for clients and communities on issues of racial justice in a culturally competent manner. You know, we are in a city and a state and a community and in a profession that works with Black community quite often. And so we really want to be able to navigate with them in a competent manner. The skills course will guide students in understanding how to navigate representation through a lens of awareness of the specific impact race and gender has on our judicial system and the impacts on clients of color. So we're talking about clients and we're talking about colleagues. And so we're going to dive into both of that today. Students will explore the emotion experienced by Black community and attorneys of color, stemming from the reality of navigating daily tasks among overt racist acts, microaggressions, and threatened policy. And also want to state that this course satisfies the skills requirement of cultural competence. And so we are going to dive right into the meat. There's me. My name is Nia Weeks. I am a 2009 Loyola Law alum. I'm also the founder and executive director of Citizen She and Citizen She United. And I didn't feel like going through my whole resume, so I threw all my logos up on here. Citizen She and Citizen She United, advocating for Black women across the state of Louisiana to become civically engaged. Black Women's Lawyer Collective, founded with my co-director, Angel Harris. And really we put together CLEs for attorneys to learn what it means, exactly what we're doing, what it means to navigate with Black community as clients and colleagues. I'm also associate professor at Xavier University. I got some of my students here in on the live. I teach race, law, and policy at Xavier this semester. I also have a couple of podcasts, Parlay the morning after, and She Shows Up. Parlay is on Sunday mornings. She Shows Up happens on every Wednesday in the evenings. And then we're working through 2 campaigns this election cycle, my Squad Up campaign and my Road to 300,000, trying to get 300,000 Black women in the state of Louisiana to become frequent voters. So that is this talking head that is here with you guys. I'm also a former public defender here in Orleans Parish. I also clerk for a judge, the former Judge Angelique Reed, the late Angelique Reed. She passed away last year in First City Court. Goodness, when I graduated law school for the first year of my existence as an attorney. I got some dope girls working with me. And that's why, I say, Citizen She's dope law clerks. One thing I'm grateful for, Loyola gives me some bad Black women that I've worked with over the past few years. Every year, the women that I get to work with get better and better and better. This year is absolutely no exception. And because they are the ones that made sure that this happened, they're also going to be the ones presenting to you today. So I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and let you know who they are. So Heather, we can unmute Michaela, and Michaela can say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Graves. I'm a 2L.
Awesome. Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Desta, and I'm a 2L as well.
Chanel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chanel. I'm a 2L as well, and we're all excited to have this opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much. And I know you all are going to get some really great knowledge and perspective from them. So I'm really excited to be able to present this subject with them. So just to give you a little bit of a syllabus and outline of what we're going to talk about today, there are 3 topic areas that they really want to make sure that everyone learned and got. And so we're going to kind of delve into each of these. They are implicit bias, allyship, and community awareness. And throughout the presentations, as we go through each, this is an interactive space. And so I'm gonna ask everybody to kind of gather some paper, some pens, markers, whatever you like to write with that makes you feel good, happy, and on all that stuff, because we're gonna be interacting and reacting with each other. We are going to be asking you guys to put some things in the chat. And so we're going to, because, there's a lot of people on the call, we're not going to do any call outs, but we are going to put things in the chat. And the women that are working with us are going to also be reading what's going on in the chat. So Michaela, Rebecca, and Chanel, they'll be letting you all know what's going on in the chat as we navigate through some of these thoughts and questions. We're also going to be watching some videos. I am going to center that we are going to be talking about some stuff that can be uncomfortable. We're going to be talking about some stuff that may be difficult for some people to kind of think introspectively of, but we got to do this work in order for our clients and for our legal community to feel good and whole, and for us to all work together to further what we are trying to do. We got to do this work. As we're navigating through, I'm asking you guys to do 3 really important things. First, I'm going to ask you guys to think critically. I want you to think critically about yourself and your own thoughts and your own perspectives. I also want you to think critically about the people around you, the people you grew up with, the people you know, the people you love, and consider how they've navigated within, around communities of color, around women, around trans community, how they speak to them, how they move with them, the jokes that are said, the subtleties that happen. I want you to think very critically about that as we move through all of this. I also am asking you guys to listen openly. This is not an attack. This is not an accusation. This is a moment for us to kind of look and think about ourselves, and then think about how we would navigate with people that we're representing. One thing as attorneys is that, it is not necessarily our name that's on the paper. It is client's name versus so-and-so. And we are the conduit that we're navigating between what the client says and what the client wants, and what the court hears and what the court understands. But it's their lives that are mostly impacted. And so we really have to understand who these people are, how they feel, how that impacts them, that the one person who's supposed to be their ally in navigating through whatever legal space that they're navigating through, how it feels to them when we talk to them and we say and use language that's hurtful, demeaning. We do microaggressions, maybe not intentionally, but it hurts. And so I want you all to listen openly, with open hearts. And then I want you to trust yourself and others. Now, you are the best, expert in your own life. And so you know what you need to do, or what you need to understand, and what you need to feel in order for you to progress to a place where you're representing clients in a way that really matters to them and their lives, and that you're talking to colleagues in a way that makes them feel like you acknowledge their brilliance, that you acknowledge the work, that they're doing the same, class work and the same legal work and trying to learn the same subject matter as you. And so trust yourself, and then trust the people that are around you. So one of my favorite things in the whole world, one of my favorite humans in the whole world is Bryan Stevenson. You all, if you're not familiar with Bryan Stevenson, you might be familiar with Just Mercy. Just Mercy just came out maybe last year, 2 years ago, about Bryan Stevenson's work around the death penalty and exonerating his very first client as a young lawyer in the rural South, getting his client off from, out of being, on death row. His thoughts around justice and injustice are meaningful to me. It's guided me in a lot of the work that I've done. I had the opportunity to meet Bryan Stevenson a couple of times, and he is everything that you would expect him to be. And so I want to center this workshop with his words. And so we are going to watch his TED Talk, which I think every lawyer should watch.
Well, this is a real
The sound went out when you muted.
There's a great deal of hopelessness And being here at TED and seeing the stimulation, hearing it has been very, very energizing to me. And one of the things that's emerged in my short time here is that TED has an identity. And you can actually say things here that have impacts around the world. And sometimes when it comes through TED, it has meaning and power that it doesn't have when it doesn't. And I mention that because I think identity is really important. And we've had some fantastic presentations. And I think what we've learned is that if you're a teacher, your words can be meaningful, but if you're a compassionate teacher, they can be especially meaningful. If you're a doctor, you can do some good things, but if you're a caring doctor, you can do some other things. So I want to talk about the power of identity. And I didn't learn about this actually practicing law and doing the work that I do. I actually learned about this from my grandmother. I grew up in a house that was the traditional African-American home that was dominated by a matriarch, and that matriarch was my grandmother. She was tough, she was strong, she was powerful. She was the end of every argument in our family. She was the beginning of a lot of arguments in our family. She was the daughter of people who were actually enslaved. Her parents were born in slavery in Virginia in the 1840s. She was born in the 1880s, and the experience of slavery very much shaped the way she saw the world. My grandmother was tough, but she was also loving. When I would see her as a little boy, she'd come up to me and she'd give me these hugs and she'd squeeze me so tight I could barely breathe. And then she'd let me go. And an hour or two later, if I saw her, she'd come over to me and she'd say, "Brian, do you still feel me hugging you?" And if I said no, she'd assault me again. And if I'd say yes, she'd leave me alone. And she just had this quality that you always wanted to be near her. And the only challenge was that she had 10 children. My mom was the youngest of her 10 kids. And sometimes when I would go and spend time with her, it'd be difficult to get her time and attention. My cousins would be running around everywhere. And I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, waking up one morning, going into the living room, and all of my cousins were running around. And my grandmother was sitting across the room, staring at me. And at first I thought we were playing a game. And I would look at her and I'd smile, but she was very serious. And after about 15 or 20 minutes of this, she got up and she came across the room and she took me by the hand and she said, "Come on, Brian, you and I are going to have a talk." And I remember this just like it happened yesterday. I never will forget it. She took me out back and she said, "Brian, I'm going to tell you something, but you don't tell anybody what I tell you." I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "Now you make sure you don't do that." I said, "Sure." Then she sat me down and she looked at me and she said, "I want you to know I've been watching you." And she said, "I think you're special." She said, "I think you can do anything you want to do. I will never forget it." And then she said, "I just need you to promise me 3 things, Brian." I said, "Okay, Mom." And she said, "The first thing I want you to promise me is that you'll always love your mom." She said, "That's my baby girl, and you have to promise me now you'll always take care of her." Well, I adored my mom, so I said, "Yes, Mama, I'll do that." Then she said, "The second thing I want you to promise me is that you'll always do the right thing, even when the right thing is the hard thing." And I thought about it, and I said, "Yes, Mama, I'll do that." Then finally she said, "The third thing I want you to promise me is that you'll never drink alcohol." Well, I was 9 years old, so I said, "Yes, Mama, I'll do that." I grew up in the country in the rural South, and I have a brother a year older than me and a sister a year younger. When I was about 14 or 15, one day my brother came home and he had this 6-pack of beer. I don't know where he got it. And he grabbed me and my sister, and we went out in the woods, and we were kind of just out there doing the stuff we crazily did. And he had a sip of this beer, and he gave some to my sister, and she had some, and they offered it to me. I said, no, that's okay. Y'all go ahead. I'm not going to have any beer." My brother said, "Come on, we're doing this today. You always do what we do. I had some, your sister had some, have some beer." I said, "No, I don't feel right about that. Y'all go ahead. And then my brother started staring at me. He said, what's wrong with you? Have some beer." Then he looked at me real hard. He said, "Oh, I hope you're not still hung up on that conversation Mama had with you." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He says, "Oh, Mama tells all the grandkids that they're special." I was devastated. And I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. I know this might be broadcast broadly, but I'm 52 years old, and I'm going to admit to you that I've never had a drop of alcohol. I don't say that because I think that's virtuous. I say that because there is power in identity. When we create the right kind of identity, we can say things to the world around us that they don't actually believe make sense. We can get them to do things that they don't think they can do. When I thought about my grandmother, of course she would think all her grandkids were special. My grandfather was in prison during Prohibition. My male uncles died of alcohol-related diseases, and these were the things she thought we needed to commit to. Well, I've been trying to say something about our criminal justice system. This country is very different today than it was 40 years ago. In 1972, there were 300,000 people in jails and prisons. Today, there are 2.3 million. The United States now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. We have 7 million people on probation and parole, and mass incarceration, in my judgment, has fundamentally changed our world. In poor communities and communities of color, there is this despair, there is this hopelessness that is being shaped by these outcomes. 1 out of 3 Black men between the ages of 18 and 30 is in jail, in prison, on probation, or parole. In urban communities across this country, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, 50 to 60% of all young men of color are in jail or prison, or on probation and parole. Our system isn't just being shaped in these ways that seem to be distorting around race, they're also distorted by poverty. We have a system of justice in this country that treats you much better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. And yet we seem to be very comfortable. The politics of fear and anger has made us believe that these are problems that are not our problems. We've been disconnected. It's interesting to me, we're looking at some very interesting developments in our work. My state of Alabama, like a number of states, actually permanently disenfranchises you if you have a criminal conviction. Right now in Alabama, 34% of the Black male population has permanently lost the right to vote. We're actually projecting in another 10 years, the level of disenfranchisement will be as high as it's been since prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and there is this stunning silence. I represent children. A lot of my clients are very young. The United States is the only country in the world where we sentence 13-year-old children to die in prison. We have life imprisonment without parole for kids in this country. And we're actually doing some litigation. Only country in the world. I represent people on death row. It's interesting, this question of the death penalty. In many ways, we've been taught to think that the real question is, do people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed? And that's a very sensible question. But there's another way of thinking about where we are in our identity. The other way of thinking about it is not, do people deserve to die for the crimes they commit, but do we deserve to kill? I mean, it's fascinating. Death penalty in America is defined by error. For every 9 people who have been executed, we've actually identified 1 innocent person who's been exonerated and released from death row. A kind of astonishing error rate, 1 out of 9 people, innocent. I mean, it's fascinating. In aviation, we would never let people fly on airplanes if for every 9 planes that took off, 1 would crash. But somehow we can insulate ourselves from this problem. It's not our problem. It's not our burden. It's not our struggle. Well, I talk a lot about these issues. I talk about a race and this question of whether we deserve to kill. And it's interesting, when I teach my students about African-American history, I tell them about slavery. I tell them about terrorism, the era that began at the end of Reconstruction that went on to World War II. We don't really know very much about it, but for African-Americans in this country, that was an era defined by terror. In many communities, people had to worry about being lynched. They had to worry about being bombed. It was the threat of terror that shaped their lives. And these older people come up to me now and they say, Mr. Stevenson, you give talks, you make speeches, you tell people to stop saying we're dealing with terrorism for the first time in our nation's history after 9/11. They tell me to say, no, tell them that we grew up with that. And that era of terrorism, of course, was followed by segregation and decades of racial subordination and apartheid. And yet we have in this country this dynamic where we really don't like to talk about our problems. We don't like to talk about our history. And because of that, we really haven't understood what it's meant to do the things we've done historically. And we're constantly running into each other. We're constantly creating tensions and conflicts. We have a hard time talking about race. And I believe it's because we are unwilling to commit ourselves to a process of truth and reconciliation. In South Africa, people understood that we couldn't overcome apartheid without a commitment to truth and reconciliation. In Rwanda, even after the genocide, there was this commitment. But in this country, we haven't done that. was giving this lecture in Germany, some lectures in Germany about the death penalty. It was fascinating because one of the scholars stood up after the presentation and said, well, you know, it's deeply troubling to hear what you're talking about. I said, well, we don't have the death penalty in Germany. And of course, we can never have the death penalty in Germany. And the room got very quiet, and this woman said, there's no way with our history we can ever engage in the systematic killing of human beings. It would be unconscionable for us to, in an intentional, deliberate way, set about executing people. And I thought about that. What would it feel like to be living in a world where the nation state of Germany was executing people, especially if they were disproportionately Jewish? I couldn't bear it. It would be unconscionable. And yet in this country, in the states of the Old South, we execute people where you're 11 times more likely to get the death penalty if the victim is white than if the victim is black, 22 times more likely to get it if the defendant is black and the victim is white. In the very states where there are buried in the ground the bodies of people who were lynched, and yet there is this disconnect. Well, I believe that our identity is at risk. That when we actually don't care about these difficult things, the positive and wonderful things are nonetheless implicated. We love innovation. We love technology. We love creativity. We love entertainment. But ultimately, those realities are shadowed by suffering, abuse, degradation, marginalization. And for me, it becomes necessary to integrate the two. Because ultimately, we are talking about a need to be more hopeful, more committed, more dedicated to the basic challenges of living in a complex world. And for me, that means spending time thinking and talking about the poor, the disadvantaged, those who will never get to TED. But thinking about them in a way that is integrated in our own lives. You know, ultimately, we all have to believe things we haven't seen. We do. As rational as we are, as committed to intellect as we are, innovation, creativity, development comes not from the ideas in our mind alone. They come from the ideas in our mind that are also fueled by some conviction in our heart. And it's that mind-heart connection that I believe compels us to not just be attentive to all the bright and dazzling things, but also the dark and difficult things. Václav Havel, the great Czech leader, talked about this. He said, when we were in Eastern Europe and dealing with oppression, we wanted all kinds of things, but mostly what we needed was hope, an orientation of the spirit, a willingness to sometimes be in hopeless places and be a witness. Well, that orientation of the spirit is very much at the core of what I believe even TED communities have to be engaged in. There is no disconnect around technology and design that will allow us to be fully human until we pay attention to suffering, to poverty, to exclusion, to unfairness, to injustice. Now, I will warn you that this kind of identity is a much more challenging identity than ones that don't pay attention to this. It will get to you. I had the great privilege when I was a young lawyer meeting Rosa Parks, and Ms. Parks used to come back to Montgomery every now and then, and she would get together with two of her dearest friends, these older women, Johnny Carr, who was the organizer of the Montgomery bus boycott, amazing African-American woman, and Virginia Durr, a white woman whose husband, Clifford Durr, represented Dr. King. And these women would get together and just talk. And every now and then Ms. Carr would call me and she'd say, Brian, Ms. Parks is coming to town and we're going to get together and talk. Do you want to come over and listen? And I'd say, yes, ma'am, I do. She said, well, what are you going to do when you get here? I said, I'm going to listen. And I'd go over there, and I would just listen. It would be so energizing and so empowering. And one time I was over there listening to these women talk, and after a couple of hours, Ms. Parks turned to me and she said, now, Brian, tell me what the Equal Justice Initiative is. Tell me what you're trying to do. I began giving her my rap. I said, well, we're trying to challenge injustice. We're trying to help people who've been wrongly convicted. We're trying to confront bias and discrimination in the administration of criminal justice. We're trying to end life without parole sentences for children. We're trying to do something about the death penalty. We're trying to reduce the prison population. We're trying to end mass incarceration. I gave her my whole rap, and when I finished, she looked at me and she said, She said, that's gonna make you tired, tired, tired. And that's when Miss Carr leaned forward. She put her finger on my face. She said, that's why you've got to be brave, brave, brave. And I actually believe that the TED community needs to be more courageous. We need to find ways to embrace these challenges, these problems, the suffering. Because ultimately, our humanity depends on everyone's humanity. I've learned very simple things doing the work that I do. It's just taught me very simple things. I've come to understand and to believe that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I believe that for every person on the planet. I think if somebody tells a lie, they're not just a liar. I think if somebody takes something that doesn't belong to them, they're not just a thief. I think even if you kill someone, you're not just a killer. And because of that, there's this basic human dignity that must be respected by law. I also believe that in many parts of this country, and certainly in many parts of this globe, that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. I don't believe that. I actually think in too many places, the opposite of poverty is justice. And finally, I believe that despite the fact that it is so dramatic and so beautiful and so inspiring and so stimulating, we will ultimately not be judged by our technology. We won't be judged by our design. We won't be judged by our intellect and reason. Ultimately, you judge the character of a society, not by how they treat the rich and the powerful and the privileged, but by how they treat the poor, the condemned, the incarcerated. Because it's in that nexus that we actually begin to understand truly profound things about who we are. I sometimes get out of balance. I'll end with this story. I sometimes push too hard. I do get tired, as we all do. Sometimes those ideas get ahead of our kind of thinking in ways that are important. And I've been representing kids who've been sentenced to these very harsh sentences. And I go to the jail and I see my client who's 13 and 14, and he's been certified to stand trial as an adult. And I start thinking, well, how did that happen? How can a judge turn you into something that you're not? And the judge has certified him as an adult, but I see this kid, and I was up too late one night, and I started thinking, well, gosh, if the judge can turn you into something that you're not, the judge must have magic power. I said, yeah, Brian, the judge has some magic power. You should ask for some of that. And because I was up too late and wasn't thinking real straight, I started working on a motion. And I had a client who was 14 years old, a young, poor black kid, and started working on this motion and the head of the motion was a motion to try my poor 14-year-old black male client like a privileged white 75-year-old corporate executive. And I put in my motion that there was prosecutorial misconduct and police misconduct and judicial misconduct. There was a crazy line in there about how there's no conduct in this county, it's all misconduct. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, now, did I dream that crazy motion or did I actually write it? And to my horror, not only had I written it, but I had sent it to court. A couple months went by and I just had forgotten all about it. And I finally decided, oh gosh, I gotta go to the court and do this crazy case. And I got in my car and I was feeling really overwhelmed. And I got in my car and I went to this courthouse and I was saying, oh, this is gonna be so difficult, so painful. I finally got out of the car and I started walking up to the courthouse. And as I was walking up the steps of this courthouse, there was an older black man who was the janitor in this courthouse. When this man saw me, he came over to me and he said, who are you? I said, I'm a lawyer. He said, you're a lawyer? I said, yes, sir. And this man came over to me and he hugged me. And he whispered in my ear, he said, I'm so proud of you. And I have to tell you, it was energizing. It connected deeply with something in me about identity, about the capacity of every person to contribute to a community, to perspective that is hopeful. Well, I went into the courtroom. As soon as I walked inside, the judge saw me coming in. He said, Mr. Stevenson, did you write this crazy motion? I said, yes, sir, I did. And we started arguing. People started coming in because they were just outraged. I had written these crazy things. And police officers were coming in, and assistant prosecutors and clerk workers. And before I knew it, the courtroom was filled with people angry that we were talking about race, that we were talking about poverty, that we were talking about inequality. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see this janitor pacing back and forth. And he kept looking through the window, and he could hear all of this hollering. He kept pacing back and forth. And finally, this older black man with this very worried look on his face came into the courtroom and sat down behind me, almost at counsel table. About 10 minutes later, the judge said we would take a break. And during the break, there was a deputy sheriff who was offended that the janitor had come into court. And this deputy jumped up and he ran over to this older black man. He said, Jimmy, what are you doing in this courtroom? This older black man stood up and he looked at that deputy and he looked at me and he said, I came into this courtroom to tell this young man, keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. I've come to TED because I believe that many of you understand that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice, that we cannot be full, evolved human beings until we care about human rights and basic dignity, that all of our survival is tied to the survival of everyone, that our visions of technology and design and entertainment and creativity have to be married with the visions of humanity, compassion, and justice. And more than anything, for those of you who share that, I've simply come to tell you to keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Thank you very much.
So that is what we are going to do today, is that we're going to keep our eyes on the prize and hold on. As we go through this today, there are some questions that I want you all to kind of contemplate. I don't want you to put their answer to these questions in the chat, but I do want you to contemplate them. And Hector, the law students are going to be reading these each. And so I'm not quite sure how to unmute as each one reads, but I think we'll go in order of Michaela, Rebecca, and Chanel, and then they're gonna go back and forth that way.
Okay, they can unmute themselves as they did when they were introduced.
Okay. Perfect, thank you.
So some things we want you to consider. First, what are your thoughts on Black, Indigenous, people of color clients? And what are your thoughts on Black, Indigenous, people of color lawyers and law students? Do you think that they're smart, wealthy, kind, believable, and capable?
Do you see Black, Indigenous, people of color, lawyers, or clients, or colleagues as one group? How do you talk to Black, Indigenous, people of color, clients, lawyers, law students? How do you engage if they are not friendly?
What do you think when they do something that fits into your perception of Black, Indigenous, people of color? Can they change your mind?
So I want you guys to kind of sit with those questions before we even start. Kind of root yourself in how you've talked to, thought about, perceived your colleagues of color, your clients of color, if you're in clinic, how you've navigated with, and even like staff around the law school or your undergraduate university. How have you thought about them? What has informed you to think the way that you have about them? And how has that resulted in your navigation with them? So I just want you to sit with those questions a little bit, and we will revisit those questions at the end. So first, we're going to talk about implicit bias. And I know that this is a subject that it gets tossed around. I've seen it everywhere, especially now that we are in a space in our world, in our community, where people are trying to think introspectively about, why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way? We're gonna go through some video, we're gonna go through some exercises, and we're gonna go through some, some thoughts around definitions and terms, all around implicit bias. We're gonna talk about, how we've gotten here, what shapes your bias, what shapes your thoughts about people. Can those thoughts be changed? And how those thoughts inform how we navigate and work with our clients as attorneys. So we're gonna watch a quick video about blind spots.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate? She's a woman. This is a man's job. She's clearly not educated.
Does she even speak English?
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume. Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes.
Okay, Michaela, I've restarted the recording, so you can go ahead, and I'll be contacting Ms. Weeks to see if I can offer any assistance.
To do is consider your blind spots. First, think about who are your 3 closest friends? What similarities do you share? Who are your neighbors? And when was the last time you noticed a prejudice in yourself?
What is an environment I find myself most comfortable in? Who else is there? What is a time I felt uncomfortable with someone's sexual orientation or sexual practices? When I picture a lawyer in my head, do they look and sound like me?
When was the last time I remember letting something slide that could be racist, prejudice, or discriminatory in some way? What was the last gender stereotype I witnessed but didn't mention? When did I last get uncomfortable or feel like I didn't fit in because I was a minority in some way? When was the last time I took leadership to welcome a person different from myself into an activity, event, or space?
Okay, so next we're going to discuss some terms and definitions that implicit bias is shown in. So prejudice is an opinion, prejudgment, or attitude about a group or its individual members. A prejudice can be positive, but in our usage refers to a negative attitude. Prejudice often is accompanied by ignorance, fear, or hatred. Prejudices are formed by a complex psychological process that begins with attachment to a close circle of acquaintances or an in-group, such as a family. Prejudice is often aimed at outgroups. A stereotype is an exaggerated belief, image, or distorted truth about a person or group. A generalization that allows for little or no individual differences or social variation. Stereotypes are based on images in mass media or reputations passed on by parents, peers, and other members of society. Stereotypes can be positive or negative. And lastly, discrimination is behavior that treats people unequally because of their group memberships. Discriminatory behavior, ranging from slights to hate crimes, often begins with negative stereotypes and prejudices.
Next, we want to talk about how there's a lack of legislative impact. Despite 30 years of equal rights, legislation levels of poverty, education, and success vary widely across races. Discrimination continues in housing and real estate sales, and racial profiling is a common practice even among ordinary citizens. The first step may be to admit biases are learned early and are countered to our commitment to just treatment. Parents, teachers, faith leaders, and other community leaders can help children question their values and beliefs and point out subtle stereotypes used by peers and in the media. Children should also be surrounded by cues that equally matter. For African Americans, civil rights laws forced integration and non-discrimination, which in turn helped to change public opinion. But psychologists have no ready roadmap for undoing such overt and especially hidden stereotypes and prejudices. To improve does not mean to disappear.
Conscious attitudes and beliefs can change. The negative stereotypes associated with many immigrant groups, for example, have largely disappeared over time. For African Americans, civil rights laws forced integration and non-discrimination, which in turn helped to change public opinion. But psychologists have no ready roadmap for undoing such overt and especially hidden stereotypes and prejudices. If people are aware of their hidden biases, they can monitor and attempt to ameliorate hidden attitudes before they're expressed through behavior.
I'm not sure if Nia made it back on yet. I think Nia's back on, so we're gonna allow her to continue with her part here.
Thank you, guys. Am I back on? Can y'all hear me?
We can hear you, Nia.
Okay, perfect. I don't want to disrupt where you guys are, Michaela. Can you let me know where you guys are?
We are right at the side for the Clarke-Doll test. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen?
No, actually, if you can keep sharing your screen, Michaela, just so that we can make sure we have continuity,
Okay.
that would be awesome for right now, because my internet connection is interesting right now.
Okay.
So, did you talk about the Clarke-Doll test, or is that where we are?
That's where we are.
Perfect. So if anyone is unfamiliar with Clarke-Doll test, I'm going to give you kind of a basis of understanding of what it is and why we're bringing it up in this context. The Clarke-Doll test was conducted by Dr. Kenneth Clark and his wife, Mamie Clark, for her master's degree thesis. Its focus was on the stereotypes that children's self-perception relates to their own race. Some of you all may seen this before. It's when the children were asked to pick the doll that they thought was the good doll, thought was the bad child, thought that was the child that most adults liked. The results of the Clarke-Doll test study is actually part of the basis of Brown v. Board of Education. And the reason why I want to bring this up is twofold. A, because the reality is that everything around us shapes how we think, including how we think and feel about other people. And children, even though we may not intend for children to feel or think a certain way about people that look like them or people that don't look like them, their environment, the people that we have them around, shapes that. It informs them on what they should do. They watch their parents, they watch their peers, they watch the people in their community, and and that they tell them how they should interact and react with the people that are around them. And so the Clarke test answered some of those questions. And it was very basic. They asked the kids, they put two dolls in front of them, a black doll and a white doll, and they asked them a series of questions. As time moved forward, people were like, does this Clark-Doll test still exist? Do these biases still exist? We're in a era where we're further away from Jim Crow era. We're further away and moving further down past, when Brown v. Board of Education was passed. Are we still in this space? So Anderson Cooper decided to answer some of those questions himself. And so the next video that we're going to explore talks about Anderson Cooper's exploration and where we are from the Clark-Doll study. And so I'm going to ask Michaela if we can go to the next slide. And we can go ahead and play this. Sorry, Michaela. I think the slide before that, this video.
Anderson Cooper, AC360, CNN weeknights 10 Eastern.
There are lots of different colors for skin.
I have questions for you about these pictures of different children.
After I read the question, I want you to point to the picture that fits the story.
Are children colorblind in America?
Show me the smart child.
Show me the mean child.
Can you show me the dumb child?
Show me the nice child.
Is bias measurable even at an early age?
Why is she the bad child?
Because she's black.
And why is he the ugly child?
Because he looks like he's white.
Why is he the dumb child?
Because he has dark brown skin.
Why is she the bad child?
Because she makes fun of everybody else's skin color.
How much do kids learn from what they see and hear from adults?
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like.
And show me the child who has a skin color most adults don't like.
These are questions that we, along with CNN's Soledad O'Brien and a team of psychologists hired by CNN, spent months investigating through tests, interviews with children and their parents. But they're questions that have been asked for decades. The first doll study ignited controversy in the 1940s, when psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark pioneered studies in the effects of segregation in schools by asking African American kids to choose between black and white dolls. The so-called doll test found black kids overwhelmingly preferred white over black. Those results were at the center of the landmark 1954 Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education that desegregated American schools. Now, with the first African-American president and nearly 60 years after segregation was overturned, we wondered, where are we today? How do kids see differences in race? What we discovered might shock you, but first, how we got there.
Skin color, child skin color estimate.
Okay, yeah.
We asked renowned child psychologist and University of Chicago researcher Dr. Margaret Beal Spencer to design a pilot study for CNN and analyze the results.
Our children are always near us, because we're a society. And what we put out there, kids report back. You ask the question, they'll give you the answer.
Spencer's team tested more than 130 kids in 8 schools with very different racial and economic demographics. Half of the schools were in the North, half in the South. Oh, nicely done. While the country is much more diverse today than in the 1940s, the children in this project are from 2 age groups and 2 races, white and black, to better allow comparison to the original doll study. 4- and 5-year-old children were asked a series of questions about these images. 9- and 10-year-old children were asked questions about the same images, as well as this color bar chart. The tests led us to 3 major findings. First, white children as a whole responded with a high rate of what researchers call white bias, identifying the color of their own skin with positive attributes and darker skin with negative attributes.
Show me the dumb child.
Dumb child.
Okay, why is she the dumb child?
Because she has black skin.
Show me the mean child. Why is he the mean child?
Because she's brown.
Show me the bad child. Why is he the bad child?
Because he is black.
Okay. Show me the ugly child. Why is he the ugly child?
Because he's black.
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like. And show me the child who has the skin color most adults don't like. Show me the child who has the skin color most children like. Show me the child who has the skin color most children don't like. Show me the child who has the skin color most girls want. Show me the child who has the skin color most girls don't want.
The questions that got overwhelmingly white biased answers?
Show me the dumb child.
About 76% of the younger white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones.
Show me the mean child.
About 66% of the younger white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones.
Show me the child who has the skin color most children don't like.
Again, about 66% of the younger white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones.
Show me the bad child.
More than 59% of the older white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones. But some white children did have more race-neutral responses.
So could you show me the good-looking child? So what are you thinking? I know you pointed to them all, but tell me what you're thinking.
I'm thinking that I do not care if they are black, white, mixed, or any kind of race. I think that it matters who they really are.
Thank you, Michaela. So, the reality is that what happened during the Clark-Doll study back in the 1940s, those perceptions that were built, and we have to remember that we were coming off an era that we as a community consider to be extremely overtly racist, right? Michaela, can you go back to the other slides when we were doing the definitions of prejudice, discrimination? Here we go. Prejudice. Here we go. Thank you, Michaela. We're talking about an era and time that we will all consider to be overtly prejudiced, where racism was rearing its ugly head. We're talking about the cusp of the civil rights era. And so we all as a community identify, and during the Clark-Doll study, in its shape of the outcome of Brown v. Board of Education, we all can agree that we felt the mood of the times, and that these children were picking up the perception that children and people who were associated with darker skin had these negative attributes, and that people who had lighter skin had positive attributes. Michaela, can you go forward to the slide that says, improving, but the right before. Thank you. Improve does not mean disappear, right? And so we've navigated through civil rights laws, civil rights era. We have had the induction of a Black president that the country voted for. And so there's all these ideas around that we have moved so much more forward in this country as a community that these biases probably don't exist. That's the sentiment that a lot of people now navigate through. However, there's something that is continuing to go on in this country, that the children are having the same results as they did back in the 1940s. And so when we talk about systemic racism and ideas around implicit bias, not just existing out there in the world and in the air, but they're truly ingrained in our culture. They're truly ingrained in the way we react and interact with others in a way that children, even though we don't intend for them to think that way or feel that way, they're picking it up, and they are still responding in the same way that the children did back in the 1940s. And that is continuing to be shaped as when we enter adolescenthood, when we become adults, that those ideas don't disappear. And just because we've made improvements in this country, just because we've navigated forward to a space where Loyola Law School is letting us have this incredible course on racial justice, just because we move forward does not mean that the things that are harmful and hurtful that have always existed in this country have disappeared. And so I wanted you all to kind of contemplate that and think about the impact that that study had on the Supreme Court decision that has impact on us, and we tout as a decision that is reflective of where we are and where we want to be in this country, and where we can navigate forward, because there's so many more cases coming through in the same vein. And so how do we think about our role as lawyers in bringing in thoughts and studies around how people actually interact and react to each other to inform how the Supreme Court and the judicial system should respond to people and communities? Michaela, if we can go forward. One more. Yes, one more. So in all of that, you know, as lawyers, we are professional linguists, right? It is, you know, and all these things we're talking about, what informs these children, when we talk about how that information informs how they respond to their community, and respond to their peers, and how that informs them as they grow up. The other thing that informs us in community are words. And like I said, as lawyers, we are professional linguists. We actually love words, and we use words to do everything. We use words to convince a jury. We use our words to convince a judge. We use our words to listen. Our clients give us words, and then we take the words that the client has said, and we structure them in a way that makes sense within a legal space. You know, we write and we think. You know, many of you all, especially, you know, law students, are doing your writing requirement, that 20-page paper. It's a bunch of words thrown on a piece of paper. You know, most of our classes, as we get to upper level, like second and third year law students, you know, we're required to write papers. And what those papers are intended to do is to convince the reader to think like we do. That's what we're trying to do. When we have a client that comes in and, you know, they say, you know what? I have been treated unfairly in this way, and I need this kind of relief. Got it. I need to be able to say that to a judge, use the language that is around me, the legal language that's around me, that I can kind of construct in a way to tell the judge, my client has been harmed like this, and I need you to give them relief. And we have to construct those words and know who our audience is. You know, sometimes, you know, we're writing to, you know, judges, court systems, we're arguing to juries that don't see our clients in their full humanity, and we have to structure our words to convey that. You know, sometimes, you know, we have spaces that we're really trying to, you know, we don't have a whole lot to work with. Sometimes I say, I throw, you know, S on the wall and see what sticks, you know, but we use our words to convince. The one group that is really good at using words to convince and convey thought is the media. And the media informs us in very strong ways. And it's really interesting the way the media kind of takes ideas around bias, right? And when we talk about the bias that, you know, that children have and as they've grown up, these biases stay with us, and the media is able to speak to us in a way that informs how they want us to think. The media has the power to utilize language, to utilize storytelling, to get people to act, feel, and move. And it's a very strong space that the media holds. And in that same vein, as lawyers, we hold the same kind of power, right? We have the power to get judges to do things that will have an implication on the way the rest of the community navigates and feels. We are doing, you know, I watched incredible arguments at the Supreme Court not too long ago. And the way those words were conveyed were so moving that it forced a conservative court, right, to make a decision in a way that wasn't necessarily conservative. And did that because the lawyers were able to construct an argument in a way that convinced them to move differently than what their intuition told them. And now that decision is law over the entire country. That is the power you have as a lawyer, is that your words, your thoughts conveyed to other people have the power to move and stretch this country and for good or bad, right? And so in this next exercise, we're going to look at how the media utilizes language, how the media utilizes the ability to navigate through structuring how they want people to move. And so again, we're gonna watch a video and then we're gonna go to an activity. So while we're getting ready for this activity, I'm asking everyone to get their pens and their paper, and we're gonna do an activity following this. Michaela, if we can watch the Black protest and white riots.
Funny how the media covers white riots versus black protests.
Breaking news.
Seems like when the protesters are black, the media uses some pretty harsh words.
The bad guys. Lawlessness, looting, wild animals, criminals, and thugs.
Thugs. Isn't it the right word?
However, if you're white and you're tearing up the city because of a game, you're just young people.
Young people danced on a flipped over car as UK fans did stupid things.
Some maybe got a little out of control.
Seeing a scene like this just shows how passionate the UK fans are.
It's so tough to lose, and unfortunately the ugly side that we sometimes see in sports.
And notice how the police always show up to a black protest in military-grade equipment, and yet the media claims they're just doing nothing.
It's inexplicable why the police are doing nothing.
Let's mobilize the National Guard.
If I'm a rioter and I see the police doing nothing, I might feel like I have a license.
You would.
But at white riots, the cops actually are standing around doing nothing.
Another group of cops over there just standing there.
No one was really doing anything.
These guys look like they could be watching a parade. And why is it that the leadership of the black community is always called into question?
Where is the leadership?
Leadership.
The black leadership.
The absence of leadership.
And it goes back to leadership, but that leadership has to come from the community.
But no one ever questions the leadership of white parents who let their kids burn down and vandalize their college campus.
These are just young college students who think they're playing some kind of a game with police officers.
You know, sometimes they don't even call a white riot a riot.
Party gone awry.
Some fans got a bit too rowdy after the win.
A dispute, a bloody brawl.
There was some type of altercation.
Waco, 170 arrested, 9 people dead.
They're not thugs.
Baltimore, no deaths, but it's a riot, chock full of thugs.
Thugs. Just thugs.
What if the media portrayed white rioters the same as black protesters? Let's switch the audio and see how it plays out.
Breaking news, violent protest.
What you're looking at is the unraveling of the civil society.
Criminals and thugs.
And they're raising hell and they're destroying property.
These idiotic thugs, rioting and looting, are hurting their own people.
Wild animals burning buildings down.
Especially if they know the media's all there, right? Got the cameras on everyone. It's become its own reality show.
Who acts like that towards a police officer?
Think for yourself. Don't let racist media color your perceptions. Demand fairness in media coverage. Tell the media to put an end to calling black people thugs.
You're muted, Nia.
I'm just going in, just talking to myself. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to look at 2 news articles. I'm not going to tell you which one is conservative or which one is non-conservative. They're both dealing with articles about the protests. And I found both of these articles literally by going to the newspapers and just typing in the word protest, and these are the first ones that popped up. I'd like you to take your piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and just put on the top of it Article 1, and on the other side, Article 2. And these are the questions that I want you to consider as you're reading these articles, and then we're gonna read them aloud with you. First, what are the facts of the event? Plain facts. Just black letter, what happened? What are the words or phrases that stick out to you as charged? And when I mean by charges, the ones that make you kind of be like, oh, this, like they say something to you, they're impactful to you. What is the tone of the piece? What do you feel as you're listening and reading these articles? And what are the writers communicating about their point of view? Utilizing all the things that you're hearing, what are the writers trying to get you to know and feel? And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Michaela. And I will go to the first article. And I think, Chanel, you are our reader. This is a Wall Street Journal article, and the title of the article, you can put it at the top, is "Protesters Try a New Tactic This Summer, Go to the Mayor's Home." And so I'm going to put this up, and oh goodness, it's asking me to sign in. Wait, let me go ahead and do that. Let me go with the other article first. Sorry, y'all, all these technical difficulties. Let me go ahead and share the right article. Hold on. There we go. Can you all see this article? Can everyone see it? We'll start with the political
we got
part.
it.
Awesome. How the Supreme Court dropped the ball on the right to protest. Chanel, do you want to go ahead and read this article for them?
Yes. In recent months, American cities have seen widespread protests denouncing police brutality against unarmed Black people. Local and national law enforcement agencies responding to crowds of unprecedented size and scale relied on methods that were equally unprecedented. In Portland, federal officers unleashed torrents of tear gas and paintballs, pulled protesters into unmarked vans, and severely injured one demonstrator in front of a federal courthouse. Police in Orlando, Chicago, New York, and other cities resorted to the use of long-range acoustic devices, a weapon frequently used by the U.S. military in sonic warfare and one with the potential to cause permanent hearing loss to those exposed to it. Other tactics were harsh enough to cause severe injuries, such as loss of vision, in at least 12 reported cases. National Guard helicopters.
Oops, sorry.
It's okay. Let's see. National Guard helicopters hovered dangerously close to protesters in Washington, capturing images and videos of the crowds, kicking up shards of broken glass and sending many looking for cover. For many Americans, this seemed to be exactly how the federal government is not supposed to respond to demonstrations in a country that has constitutionally protected freedom of assembly. To be sure, in some cases, the harsher tactics were in response to outbreaks of crowd violence, including attempted arson of local police buildings in cities such as Portland. But independent expert reviews of police responses showed a clear pattern in which use of excessive force by the police escalated many confrontations. And to many watching at home or on the street, the police response was widespread enough in cities that it appeared the line between how law enforcement responds to mob violence and how it responds to regular assembly had been blurred. There's a reason for that. For more than 30 years, the Supreme Court has failed to take up a freedom of assembly case. As a result, this fundamental constitutional right is in sore need of an update, such as a ruling that will protect protesters from the unduly harsh police response that has become all too common as a response to demonstration in recent years. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution explicitly describes the right of the people to peaceably assemble. This right is recognized separately from the right to freedom of speech, because the founders believed that the act of organizing a large crowd for a demonstration, parade, or protest could be more powerful than an individual speech and was therefore even more susceptible to government encroachment. Like the right to religious expression, the founders gave the right to protest its own listing, intending for the courts to give it special treatment and fashion unique legal standards that would ensure its protection. This has happened with the other specifically enshrined rights. With free speech, for example, the Supreme Court has in recent years defined specific kinds of modern speech, computer code or speech on the internet, and protections for them.
And Chanel, I think we'll end there. We'll go ahead and end there. So I want you guys to kind of look at the language that was used to convey this, thoughts around the protests, right? How the Supreme Court dropped the ball on the right to protest, and go back to those questions. Michaela, if we can, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen right now, and you can put those questions back up for them to consider those questions around that particular article.
Okay, just a second.
Or I can go back and share, Michaela. I think I can get up here.
Okay, I didn't have it pulled up anymore.
No worries, got it. And of course, mine is not wanting to share the right way, but I'll go. I'll go here. These are the questions that we were asking you all to consider, right? What are the facts of the events? What are the words or phrases that stick out to you as charged? What are the tone of the piece? And what are the writers communicating about their point of view? Take these same questions, and Michaela, if you can put these questions in the chat just so that we can have them. We're gonna go to the next article. This is one by the Wall Street Journal, and we're gonna take a look at how this is being presented. Title of the article is Protesters Try a New Tactic This Summer. Go to the mayor's home. Chanel, wanna go ahead and read this one?
Yes. Protesters frustrated that marches on the streets haven't resulted in more dramatic police reforms have found a new stage, the homes of big city mayors. In San Jose, California, a group of about 100 people spray painted an obscenity on the front door of Mayor Sam Liccardo on August 28th, threw eggs and burned an American flag as they demanded that he defund the police department. In Portland, Oregon, protesters threw burning material into the lobby of the apartment building where Mayor Ted Wheeler lives. In Seattle, they marched to the home of Mayor Jenny Durkin, who was a former federal prosecutor, later expressed alarm, that her previously undisclosed address had been made public. In Chicago, activists descended on the home of Mayor Lori Lightfoot, prompting the city to begin enforcing a statute banning protests in residential neighborhoods. Most of the mayors are Democrats who support Black Lives Matter protests and have said they want to see some law enforcement reform. But they are attempting to draw the line at the damage or threats to their homes, putting liberal leaders in the unusual position of confronting activists on their side of the political spectrum instead of opponents on the right. Mr. Liccardo initially called the protesters who came to his home menacing thugs in a tweet he later deleted. In an interview, he said these kinds of actions go too far. When people start committing acts of vandalism, it's just not right, especially when you're talking about a residence, said the mayor, who has championed a slate of police reforms that don't include funding. Funding reductions, thank you. No arrests were made in the San Jose case. Mr. Liccardo said he believes the protesters wanted a confrontation, but officers didn't take the bait. A police spokesman said officers responded too late to make arrests. Activists say marches on mayors' homes are justified because the city leaders aren't responding to calls for large budget cuts to law enforcement and other reforms made at the protests since the killing of George Floyd in police custody in May, followed by the deaths of other Black men in confrontations with the police. Some say property damage is justified as well. Vandalism is the consequence of the collapse of the social contract. That contract is violated when those entrusted with serving and protecting the community continuously murder unarmed people of color with impunity, not when someone spray paints a house to protest those murders. Kiana Simmons, president and founder of Hero Tent, a social justice group based in the San Francisco Bay Area, said in an email. People who peeled off from a march her group helped organize were among those at the San Jose mayor's house.
Thank you, Chanel. And so I want you guys to, on the other side of your paper, to write, and answer these questions on that article. What are the facts? What actually happened? What are the words or phrases that stick out to you as charged? What are the words that they use within that article that you're like, that as she was reading and you were looking at it, that you're like, that evokes an emotion? What is the tone of the piece? And what are the writers communicating about their point of view? We're gonna have the article from Political as Article 1 and the article from the Wall Street Journal as Article 2. And I want people to start putting in the chat their answers to these questions. And we'll read them as they pop up. But what are your thoughts and impressions about the messages that were conveyed in each of these articles? And we'll take about 5 minutes for people to start putting stuff into the chat. And we got 55 people here, so I am excited to see, what you guys think about these articles. And Chanel, Rebecca, Michaela, you all can put your thoughts in here as well. Chanel, when you were reading those articles, you were the one reading. What are your thoughts and feelings about the way that information was presented?
I thought it was interesting because obviously there was a clear distinction between the two sides and point of views that were presented. Obviously,
Absolutely.
one was more conservative, one was more of a liberal approach.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, thinking about the differentiation between the conservative and the liberal approach, what messages were conveyed to you in each? Like, what message was conveyed to you in the conservative approach, and what message was conveyed to you in the liberal approach?
I guess in the conservative, it was clear that it was pointing out that they disagreed with what they were kind of writing about, where it's implying stereotypes and things of that nature. And I think with the liberal, it's more in agreement, I guess, kind of. It gives people, it kind of like implies to people how they should feel too. And that's kind of what I gathered from them.
Yeah. Michaela, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would say Mila made a good point in the comments that the political articles seem to be pro-civil disobedience, and the Washington Street Journal was against this type of civil disobedience of going to the mayor's house.
Mm-hmm. I can agree with that. There's another comment, Michaela, in here.
Yeah, Ashley says that the article about going to the mayor's house was very direct. Sorry, there's a bunch of stuff coming in now, I can't see. Was very direct, and it didn't hesitate to accuse the people that they were talking about, whereas the SCOTUS right to protect article first provided enough evidence before trying to accuse the police of being too harsh.
Great.
Jillian said that the Washington Street Journal article even used the word tactics in the headline, looking at protesters as attacking.
Rebecca, do you want to read some of these for me? Brittany has a good point.
Sure. Brittany said Article 2 has a Republican view, despises the Black Lives Matter movement, made it look like the Black Lives Matter protesters took it too far by going to mayors' homes, by calling them menacing thugs. That was a phrase that was stuck out to her. Kate Lyon noted that Article 1 says the experts cited are saying that the police use excessive force, and the article describes the methods and harm to protesters. And Article 2 has no mention of specific police tactics at the protests or how protesters have been harmed, just the property damage.
I appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for all these comments that were put in the chat and your thoughts around it. Heather has one as well. Chanel, do you want to read Heather's comment? And John, I do not like butchering people's names. And so is it Jovian?
Jovian.
Okay, do you want to read these for me?
Yeah, so Heather said, what stuck out to me in Article 2 was most of the mayors targeted are Democrats that support Black Lives Matter. And then Jovian said Article 1 shifted emphasis to the failure of government to address the constitutional rights of the public.
You know, and all of these things have the opportunity to shape public opinion, right? If I am trying to figure out how I feel about this and I'm reading news from an article, you know, and I'm a Wall Street Journal, you know, that's the place I go to, then the words they use are going to inform me how things are happening around me. It's going to explain to me what's happening, you know, what people are doing, because I'm not there. I may not have the opportunity to go to the protest. I may not know people who are doing that. And so I'm getting my news on what's going on from the Wall Street Journal, right? And they're telling me what's happening, who these people are, and giving me language to use as I not just read it, but as I talk to other people. And as I'm talking to other people, you know, not intending to be, you know, racist or discriminatory or biased in any way. I'm just reporting out what happened. Who's else is listening? My children, my community members, you know, other people's children, other people in the community, they're listening to what I say, what's happening. And so my kids are going to go to school and they're going to tell their friends, this is what's happening. The protesters are being a bunch of thugs, not intending for our child to go to school saying derogatory language or harmful language or hurtful language. They're just reporting what they heard their parents say and what they heard the people around them say based on the space where they're getting their news, right? Just the news about what's going on in the world and the language that's shaping that. So then when they're talking to their peers and they may have a student of color or Black student in their class and they're using terms like thugs, you know, talking about protesting because that's what's informed them on how you navigate through. So then now you have a Black student sitting in school, you know, and like, wait, he just called, my mama went to the protest. My daddy went to the protest. My cousin went to the protest, you know, and so now we're thugs, and that shapes how these children interact and react and see each other, right? Which shapes their bias and goes back to what we watched the doll test, right? It shapes how they see the people around them, not intending to be, you know, harmful, but like it's the language that's used, the meaning behind the language that's used, and the way it shapes how we think about each other, how we talk to each other and navigate with each other. I think there's a couple more comments that I want to make sure we bring out. Michaela, you want to bring Heather and Brandon's points?
Sure. Heather says that basically they're saying that the protesters are attacking their allies and that the protests are senseless. And Brendan says that both articles pally into their ideological orientation by emphasizing that the behavior of the outgroup faction. Both articles try to paint a hero-villain dynamic. This is more effective in the political article when they discuss the use of force by law enforcement. And the Washington Street Journal article struggles to achieve the same effect when talking about protests and spray painting buildings.
Yeah, I appreciate all of those comments and thoughts around language and the way the articles impacted you. So thank you guys for doing that exercise with us. And we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next exercise. Michaela, I'm having trouble sharing mine, so I'm gonna see if you can share your screen and we can go to the next thing that we're gonna do is think about how all of this, how language, how our bias, how the things that we're around that have informed how we see people and how we navigate with people and how we talk to people, how that comes into play when we're talking to with and about our clients. And so we are going to go through a fact pattern. Yay, you know, that's what we do. So we're going to go through a fact pattern and kind of think through how the way we look at the world, the way that we see people in the world informs how we talk to attorneys, judges, and our clients of color. And so if we can go to the next slide, Michaela. And I'm gonna ask, we're gonna have some questions for you to consider as we go through the fact pattern. And I would like you all to put your answers to those questions into the chat. If you're uncomfortable with putting your answers in there, I can understand, but I would at least like you to put on a piece of paper. And if you can label the piece of paper, you know, fact pattern, and just kind of, because I want you all to reflect on your answers and thoughts around all of this stuff. And so I'd like for you all to at least write down somewhere your thoughts and your answers to these questions. And so the stipulated facts for the fact pattern are: the judge, in this case, is a Black woman. Opposing counsel is a Black male. We are in the district court in the parish of Rue. That's my niece. And you are a public defender in the parish of Rue. And so these are stipulated facts. This is, you know, where we are. We're in parish of Rue. We're a public defender in parish of Rue, Black woman judge, and Black male opposing counsel, which is the prosecutor in this case. So ladies, I'm gonna let you guys take over the fact pattern.
All right, so in the first scenario, imagine you walk into court as a public defender. You are given your case files and see that you are representing Irma Faye Stewart, a 30-year-old single African-American mother of two. You glance at the gist, which doesn't give a lot of information, but you see that she has been arrested as part of a drug sweep in Rue, Louisiana. Her co-defendants are also in court, and you notice that all but one of the people arrested were African-American. You don't have much time, maybe 10 minutes, to evaluate her case before you are required to make a bond argument for her.
All right, so that is where we are. That is the scene. I will say that most public defenders I know well, you only have a couple minutes to evaluate, so you got to be quick and talking to your client, thinking about what your client is saying, thinking about what you want to tell the judge, what you want to tell the prosecutor, how you're going to convey information to them to get your client the result that they need and they deserve. So we can go to the questions.
Okay, so like Nia said, we want you to answer these questions in the chat if you feel comfortable enough doing so. But so what is your first impression? Like, do you think she's innocent? Would you believe her if she told you she was innocent? What questions would you ask her? And what words would you use to describe her to opposing counsel and the judge?
Mm-hmm. And these are all things that you would have to consider as a public defender getting that case right away, right? You look at your client and you're like, okay, I've got 25 people in the box, so I got to come quick and and look at this person and see what I think about them, and that does inform how we navigate with our clients. It does. Whether or not we think they're innocent, I know as lawyers we don't care, but we do, right? Because it informs how we work with them. It does, and we have to admit that our thoughts around guilt and innocence does inform how we navigate with them and how we advise them, how we work with them. Whether or not if a client comes in, I have had hundreds of clients tell me, Miss Nia, that I didn't do that. Miss Nia, I'm innocent. Miss Nia, that's not, what they accuse me of. It's wrong. Do we believe our clients when they say that, or do we dismiss it and just keep going with our cases? What do you need to know about her in order to effectively get a good bond argument for her? And when you go and have private conversations and public conversations to the judge and opposing counsel, what do you say about her? What are the words that you use based on the information that you have? And so anybody has any thoughts, I'd love for you to put it in the chat if you're comfortable with doing so. I am going to ask Michaela, can you answer a couple of these questions for me about what you would do? I'm putting you on the spot, Michaela. I know we didn't go over this.
Honestly, I think this is such a hard question. Having 10 minutes just to look at a person and try to make these determinations. I don't know. I would try to ask her as many questions as I could. I honestly couldn't tell you. I would ask her, try to figure out as much as I could about what happened. And if she said she was innocent, I would believe her.
All right, guys. I understand these are some hard questions to kind of answer and put in public chat, and so I understand no one wants to do that. So we are going to, take what you've written down. Look at what you've written down. And we're going to go to the next portion of the scenario to answer some of these questions for you. And so, Rebecca, you want to go ahead and go to the next portion? Or is it who's going through this? Is it Chanel or Rebecca? I'm letting y'all
me.
Go. Okay.
Okay. So she is innocent. She is a home care nurse and was visiting the home of a patient. The judge sets her bond at $5,000, and because she makes just enough to pay for rent, food, utilities, and transportation, she does not have the 12% required by the bail bondsman to post her bond, so she is unable to go home. Her co-defendants who are guilty are able to post their bond and fight their case from the street. After a week in jail, she tells you that she has no one to care for her 2 small children and is eager to get home. You know that if she pleads guilty to a drug distribution charge, she will go home immediately because the prosecutor has offered probation.
Okay. And these are all facts that are very real. I can't tell you how many clients are literally in this space. And so, that people can't make their bond, even though $5,000 may not seem like a whole lot to a lot of people. It's a lot to me. I often think about the percentage, that 12% that's required. And I remember as a law student thinking, and as a public defender thinking, that if my bond was $5,000, I don't have enough money to post it, and I would sit in jail. And so, these are very real things that clients navigate through, and they usually sit, especially if it's a misdemeanor charge here in Orleans Parish, they're going to sit for at least a week. Sometimes 21 days is what their cases are set back. And so they plead not guilty and are able to post bond. They will sit in jail for at least a week, up to 3 weeks in jail. Can we go to the questions? Go ahead, Chanel.
So the questions are, how do you advise her? What would make you want to advise her that way? And what do you take into consideration?
So client has been sitting in jail. She can't make bond. She's got kids to go home to, but she's innocent, right? It's real. I mean, like she's a home health care nurse and she got caught up in some mess. And so how do you advise her? What do you tell her? And why would you advise her that way? What are you taking into consideration? Are you thinking about her children? Are you thinking about her family? Are you thinking about collateral consequences? Are you thinking about, her just being able to go home? What is going through your head as you are making the decision to advise her? Now the reality is that we advise clients on the full spectrum of what is available. So we tell them the good, bad, and the ugly. Sometimes I've told clients, and excuse my language, sometimes you're stepping between dog and, and crap. Because some of the decisions that we're able to make, and this is one of those scenarios, right? And we give them all the things, and the clients will ask us, well, what should I do? I will always tell clients, I can't tell you what to do because this is your life, and my ethics tell me that I have to do what you want. And I don't always feel comfortable telling clients what to do. However, I've seen lawyers, kind of nudge clients a certain way, kind of really overemphasize one outcome over the other, one space over the other. And is that something that you would do? Do you think that she should plead guilty and go ahead and get that probation and go home to her children? Do you think that she's innocent, so should she sit for a little bit longer and see what the outcome of her case is? What would you do, when she tells you about her children and that she's scared for them? And so, think about those things as you answer those questions, write those down, and I think we're going to go to the last part of the scenario.
So she refuses, steadfastly proclaiming her innocence. Finally, after almost a month in jail, she decides to plead guilty so she can return home to her children. Unwilling to risk a trial and years of imprisonment, she is sentenced to 10 years probation and ordered to pay $1,000 in fines as well as court and probation costs. She is also now branded a drug felon. She is no longer eligible for food stamps. She may be discriminated against in employment. She cannot vote for at least 5 years, and she is about to be evicted from public housing. Once homeless, her children will be taken from her and put in foster care.
All of these are very real scenarios for clients. The reality is that our housing laws make it so that you can be put out of public housing if you are convicted of any felony, especially a drug felony. And so it's, and public housing is a very tenuous space. One day we can go into all the issues around public housing and housing discrimination that happens for poor folks. But like this one thing, puts her out of that space. Also, it's not just food stamps that make you ineligible for any government assistance. Even think about it when you all fill out your FAFSA. It asks you, have you been convicted of a drug crime? If you have been convicted of a drug crime, you are ineligible for that FAFSA money or portion of that FAFSA money. We're talking about communities of color and poor communities and communities that rely on support to be able to get to the next level in life, education. Think about if you were not eligible to get your financial aid. Would you be in law school? Would you have completed your undergraduate degree? For most of us, the answer is no. And this is a woman that has 2 small children. You never know what she could want to choose in life. And now because of this, she's no longer eligible for any support to help get her and her children into a different, better space. She's also ineligible to vote, right? And so she's ineligible to participate in our civic process. And she has the potential of losing the children that she pled guilty to go home to. And so let's go to the questions.
So how do you feel? Do you feel like you won or lost? Do you care about their probation? Do you ever think about her again? Do you think her sentence is fair? Do you feel that this sentence is worth it? Do you think, considering all the information, the risk of being found guilty and having a harsh sentence is the best she could get?
Mm-hmm. So once the judge says, you got 10 years probation, you got to pay a lot of money, and, but you're going home to your children. Do you feel like that was successful? Do you feel like you won? As lawyers, one thing that you will always have to do, especially if you do something like public defense or on the civil side, work for an organization that does civil advocacy with communities of color or poor communities, you are going to have to redefine what it means to win and what it means to lose every single case. Winning is not being found not guilty all the time. Those moments are very rare. It is very rare that you go to trial and you have a client found not guilty. It's very rare that you go to trial. Most cases are settled. Most cases are, people plead out. And that's the reality of navigating. And so what you consider to be a win, what you consider to be a loss, is defined by that client in that moment, right? When you hear the sentence, are you like, that was too much? Or do you feel like, whoo, we avoided some jail time? We don't know what was going to happen. The answer to any legal question is it depends. And so how do you feel considering everything? Is it worth it? The sentence is unfair. Thank you for that comment, Heather. It's such a domino effect that is never ending, but too many people have to face this reality. Absolutely, Heather. That is very true. Can't tell you how many times this has happened to me that, and clients are like going home and, I'm on probation, and in my heart, I'm like, all it takes is one step outside. The reality is when people are on probation, I call it outside jail, and they have to navigate through life with the way the court says that they have to navigate through life. And so everything that they do in one step outside, the inability to pay that $1,000 fine can result in her going back to jail. And because it's 10 years probation, whatever that sentence would be that's hanging over her head, that 10 years, she's facing that amount of time in jail if she steps outside of the constraints of her probation. All right, thank you. And I think we're gonna go to the last slide, which talks about the final outcome of the case.
I can take this one. So the outcome is a judge eventually dismisses all cases against the defendants who did not plead guilty. At trial, the judge finds that the entire sweep was based on the testimony of a single informant who lied to the prosecution. She, however, is still a drug felon, homeless, and desperate to regain custody of her children.
Right. So oftentimes there's like these technical issues, right? And so, people are found technically innocent or by a stipulated fact, why people are actually found innocent. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time for that to happen, especially with people who choose to go into public defense. You have an overwhelming caseload. You're navigating with a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and you don't always have the time, especially initially. If you had time, you could have looked at that gist or gotten the police report and be like, nah, bruh, this looked wrong, right? You would have had an investigator go talk to the informant and be like, what did you say to the police? And or who you're talking to in the prosecution. You have time to talk to the prosecution, find out who's screening the case, and be like, nah, the information you got is wrong. Or I see this could be a potential way to find my client innocent. But you don't have that time all the time. You don't have those resources all the time. And so then it's not until you have an outcome like this that you're like, oh my goodness, right? This could have gone very differently, especially for someone who was actually innocent. Right? And we have many innocent people that navigate through our criminal justice system. A lot of innocent people that are being railroaded in all kinds of ways, and we don't have the time to contemplate their innocence. We don't have the time to contemplate the reality of their life, right? And so, and their impact is real. When I talk to my clients, the reality is at the end of that, I'm going home to my children. I'm going to make dinner with them, and I'm going to get them the next day and go back to court. Whatever the outcome is not going to disrupt my life, except for the fact that I may think about them. I may feel about them. But the reality that sentence is hers. The consequences of the sentence are hers. And she has to live with that for the rest of her life, right? And so when we're talking to our clients, we're navigating with our clients, all the things that inform us about who they are and where they are, we have to see them in their full humanity. We have to understand all the things that, put them in the space that they are, why they've made decisions that they've made, why they're doing the things that they're doing, why they are where they are, and who's involved in their life, what the things they have to do to survive from day to day. We have to take that in consideration for our clients, especially if we're defense attorneys, especially if we're prosecutors. Right? We're prosecuting cases. People who are prosecutors are prosecuting cases. You've got to think about the people that you're prosecuting, right? You've got to think about, am I offering probation, or can I dismiss this, or did this informant lie to me? If the prosecutor from the jump had said, nah, I don't think you're telling the truth, and took the time to find out if that were true, if they had taken the time within that first week that she was sitting in jail and found out that that person was lying to them, she would have gone home a week ago, at the first week, and would have been home with her children, and it had all been okay, right? Everybody in the courtroom has a responsibility to think about every single person that navigates through the court as a person. You have to think about the judge as a person and talk respectfully to the judge and be like, the judge is smart. Judges know what they're doing. I often hear terms with judges, especially judges of color, when they make decisions that are the antithesis of what we want them to say. I've heard attorneys say they're stupid. They don't know the law. They don't understand the application of the law. When it's white judges, they'll say, oh, they made a wrong decision. Oh, they didn't do that right. They didn't hear my argument. They didn't agree with my argument. That language about the Black judges not being intelligent enough to apply the law appropriately when the result is not what they want, and a white judge just not believing them and applying that is all language that informs how we navigate with our colleagues. And you can imagine sitting in space as an attorney, hearing a colleague talk derogatory about a Black judge, and not the same language with the white judge with the same outcome. Same thing when we're talking to opposing counsel. If opposing counsel is just not agreeing with us, then it's because we're on opposite sides. We work in an adversarial space. We don't agree with each other all the time. I'm trying to get my client out of jail. You're trying to put my client in jail. We're on opposite sides, so we're not going to agree. My inability to see things your way is not a reflection of my intellect. It's a reflection of us being in an adversarial space. When language and treatment is constrained in a way that results in you talking about me and talking to me as if I lack intelligence, as if I lack the ability to understand, as if this discrepancy has nothing to do with our legal prowess, that it rests completely in the fact that I am incapable as an attorney, that's being informed to you because of my race and because of my gender, then the way you interact and react and speak to me is hurtful. And that's the beginning and end of it. It is disrespectful, it is unethical, it's all of those things as well, but the bottom line is it's hurtful. It pains me inside when I hear that and when I see that. And, navigating this world in bodies of color, navigating this world in any way that bodies of color present themselves, whether they're women, non-binary, trans, men, and there's language and there are actions perpetrated on us because simply the way that we look. It hurts, period. And we have got to work to a space where we intentionally do not harm one another. We respect each other as colleagues. We respect each other we're smart and we're good. We got to law school and we passed the bar and we're good at what we do. And so we all deserve that respect and that thought around that space. And so we can go to the next slide. Let's answer some of these questions. Does this outcome change the way you would have? Oh, I'm sorry, ladies. I'm jumping on your toes. Go ahead.
Okay, so does this outcome change how you would have originally advised her? Do you feel differently about her innocence or guilt based on the outcome? Would you have worked the case differently from the beginning if you had more information? And what information did you have from the beginning of the case that informed how you advise her?
So I'm gonna give y'all like a couple of minutes just to kind of reflect on these questions, because I think these questions are really important to consider. Thinking back on everything that's happened, knowing the final outcome, do you think differently? Do you feel differently? Does this inform you differently when you're gonna get the next client? And does it form how you navigate with that client, how you see the other client, how you feel about the other client? Does it inform how you consider and feel about the judge or the prosecutor? What tells you how you feel about, the outcome of the case? So we'll take another couple of seconds on that. I want you to jot that down just for your own notes and reflection. And Michaela, I think we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Allyship. So this was a topic area that we've been talking about, and believe it, communities of color are constantly talking about allyship. We do a lot of dope work together as a community, but it's the way that people who consider themselves allies interact and react with us that can also be damaging. People are always well-intended, I believe, but we miss the mark if we do it wrong. And we have to always remember that we are all allies, have the potential to be allies to all kinds of people. As a Black woman, I'm a Black cis woman, Black cis hetero woman. If I'm in a room with a community of trans Black women, that is not my community, right? That is their community, and I am an ally to them, right? If I'm in a room full of, sex workers, that's not the profession that I partake in, and so I am an ally to them. And so this is not just for, just white community or, men, this is for everybody. We are all allies or have the potential to be allies to everybody, and that is not in the same space as us. And even our people that are same space as us, where they present and navigate the world in their own regard. And there are times that we can be allies to them when, even though we think that they're part of our community. So we got to all think about, what it is about allyship and how we enter allyship. And so if we can do the next slide, Michaela. We're gonna watch another video. Go ahead.
Hello.
What's going down?
Oi.
Hi.
مرحبا أنا نوف.
Konnichiwa.
Vamos a hablar.
This is about you.
This is about us.
I'm a father of 4 amazing kids.
A dancer, but only in my bedroom.
A believer in the power of stories. Soy bilingüe, casi trilingüe.
An engineer, a nerd.
Sou lésbica. Eu sou amiga.
Japanese, Korean,
Palestinian, a German national. An immigrant, East Asian American woman of color. And a Zamiltak.
あなたも私の同僚です。
We make amazing things together. We aspire to bring joy
to the entire world.
But
you and I inhabit different worlds.
You and I have access to different spaces.
Unless you've experienced it, you can never fully understand what it's like to be stuck between 2 cultures.
To pretend to be someone else in order to be safe.
To grow up in South America in Spanish, and at 19 having to relocate to the US and live in English.
To be a Black gay man from the rural South.
And be the only one in the room. Unless you've experienced it yourself, you can never really know what it's like.
To have to listen to someone be degrading to your race and be the only person of that race in the room.
To lose friends, family, co-workers, simply because you wanted to be who you are.
To not know whether you can call the country that you love home.
To be the father of a trans daughter.
I think we all have a responsibility to make the world that we live in a little bit better. And you kind of have to start where you are.
What allyship is listening, compassion.
To immerse yourself in content and experiences and stories from groups that aren't of your own.
Anybody who sees something that isn't quite right can become an ally and help their colleagues.
When you've been through a struggle that hurt you for such a long time, I think you have this endless energy to give to others.
Anyone can be an ally, and everyone can use an ally, and you can use your privilege in the moment to extend that privilege to someone else.
I think this is what makes us human, to help others and to be empathetic.
We are all learning.
We're all learning.
E tá todo mundo aprendendo.
Mabad.
Together.
Juntos.
As one company.
We can all be allies.
We can all be allies.
So we're going to be doing an activity to dig into some of the reasons that we all practice allyship or identify as an ally. Being an ally doing social justice work against oppression or discrimination is often emotionally, spiritually, and physically challenging work. This activity will help us tease out some of our own motivations for being an ally and get to know others' motivations as well. So what we want you to do is take a few minutes and answer on a written piece of paper and answer the following statements. I am an ally because, or I do allyship because. If you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, do so, but we'd also like you to finish the following statements, those statements on a piece of paper.
And as you're doing this, I want you all, you can decorate your piece of paper. This is the time where you can be, as creative as you want to be. This is a very personal space if you don't want to share it in the chat. I appreciate it if you did, but I understand if you don't. I really want you to examine your personal motivation behind choosing to be an ally. And that's an ally to anybody. An ally, within your friend circle, within your non-friend circle, within your community, with people outside your community. What does it mean? Why do you do it? What is your reasoning behind wanting to step in and be in support of a space of someone that is not you, that doesn't live and experience life from the same vantage point as you, from the same presentation as you, in spaces and ways that community and other spaces may be discriminatory in all kinds of ways. Why do you do it? What is your reasoning behind it? And so we're gonna take another minute for people to write that down. And I want you to kind of hold that paper up to yourself. And so I'm not asking you to share it on screen, but I do want you to hold the paper up and look at it and examine it for yourself. And answer that question honestly for yourself as we're navigating through this information on what allyship is and what allyship should look like. I think, Michaela, we can go to the next slide. So, Black community, and that's what we've been talking about a lot, especially in an era where we're talking about Black Lives Matter movement, police brutality. That is at the a space that everyone's going to navigate through. How do we become allies to the Black community? There's some tips she gives an amazing set of tips and thoughts around what does it mean to be an ally to Black community, and so I want to share these tips with you guys now.
Hey friends! So I'm trying something different with my setup, and I don't know if it's working, but you will deal. Imagine your friend is building a house, and they ask you to help, but you've never built a house before. So it'd probably be a good idea for you to put on some protective gear and listen to the person in charge, otherwise someone's gonna get seriously hurt. Look, I'm helping! It's the exact same idea when it comes to being an ally. An ally is a person that wants to fight for the equality of a marginalized group that they're not a part of. We need your help building this house, but you probably should listen so you know what to do first. Let's do this. So here are my 5 5 tips for being a good ally. Understand your privilege. Now, a lot of people get hung up on the word privilege, so let me break it down for you nice and easy. Privilege does not mean that you are rich, that you've had an easy life, that everything's been handed to you and you've never had to struggle or work hard. All it means is that there are some things in life that you will not experience or ever have to think about just because of who you are. It's kind of like those horses that have those blinders on. They can see just fine. There's just a whole bunch of stuff on the side that they don't even know exists. So for example, there are currently 29 states where you can legally be fired for being gay, and there are 34 states where you can legally be fired for being trans. Now, as a straight cis woman, those are things that I don't have to ever think about if I don't want to. I'm not gonna be fired because I'm straight, and I'm not gonna be fired because I'm cis. So it makes sense that before I can fight for the rights of others, I have to understand what rights I have and others don't. That's privilege. Listen and do your homework. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not possible for you to learn if you aren't willing to listen. So you gotta know when to zippa the lippa. I don't know. You get what I mean. But that's the thing that's so cool about social media. There are so many people sharing their stories all around the world and connecting with people that they normally would never get a chance to without the power of the internet. So do your homework. Start reading blogs, tweets, news articles, and stories so that you can get caught up on the issues that are important to the communities that you want to support. Speak up, but not over. If the Fight for Equality was a girl group, the ally wouldn't be the lead singer or the second lead singer. They'd be Michelle. An ally's job is to support. You want to make sure that you use your privilege and your voice to educate others, but make sure to do it in such a way that does not speak over the community members that you're trying to support or take credit for things that they are already saying. This isn't Mario Kart. Stay in your lane. Realize that you're going to make mistakes and apologize when you do. Nobody's perfect. Unlearning problematic things takes time and work, so you are bound to mess up and trip and fall. But don't worry, you can brush yourself off and get right back up. And back up! Just remember that it's not about your intent, it's about your impact. So when you get called out, make sure to listen, apologize, commit to changing your behavior, and move forward. Last but certainly not least, actually the most important thing on this list is remember that ally is a verb. Saying you're an ally is not enough. You gotta do the work. 1 through 4. 1 through 4. As always, there are links in the video description box to some of the things I mentioned in this video, along with some resources that have been really helpful for me as I've gone along in my journey to be more conscious. So I want to hear from you in the comments. What are some sites that you suggest checking out, and what are some things that have helped you become a better ally? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe.
I love that. That actually breaks down exactly what does it mean to be, and tips on what does it mean to be a good ally. You know, the reality is that, you know, we are all trying to figure it out. Nobody really has it all together. I know that there are moments that I trip up all the time. I can, you know, there are moments that I'm in spaces and I use incorrect pronouns, not intentionally to be harmful, not thinking, but it's not a space I always think about because people always assume my pronouns correctly. And so I'm not always thinking about what it feels like to have my pronouns assumed incorrectly. And so I don't think about it the way other people who are always in spaces where people always assume their pronouns incorrectly. And so I trip. It's one of the spaces that I have the potential to trip. And when I do trip, I'm like, Nia, you know better. I ask for forgiveness. You know, I correct myself. I take in the feedback. You know, I have been in communities that I love, but people that I have been in allyship to for years, and I have tripped and they have called me out harshly, and I have to eat it because my words, even though I don't intend for them to have negative impact, they do. It hurts. And it especially hurts from someone like me because I know better. And they've told me already, Nia, don't do that, right? And so when I trip, the hurt is that much bigger. And when they call me out and when they tell me about their hurt, I've got to eat it, right? And that's just the reality of when we're in spaces of allyship, is that as we watched before, that there are spaces that people are navigating through that we don't always have to consider, but they do. And those spaces that they have to consider constantly impact how they live, how they eat, how they make money, how, you know, the violence that is imparted on their bodies. All of that is being considered, and when something happens that triggers the space of they have to be heightened response, especially when we're talking about people who are supposed to be people that love and support and care about us and already know better, it hurts that much more. And so as allies in any space that we're in, we've got to be able to eat it when we unintentionally do stuff that's harmful or hurtful. Michaela, can we do the next slide? Who's talking about performative allyship? Who's got this one?
So performative activism is a term for referring to activism done to increase one's social capital rather than because of one's devotion to a cause. This is surface level activism, also known and referred to as slacktivism.
This happening all the time, y'all. I was just talking to my kids about the stuff that's happening on the TikTok, and I'm probably, I'm not well versed in TikTok, but they're saying, there's all these new TikTok people that are talking about, Black Lives Matter movement, but then at the same time, like doing things that are really harmful and knowing that they are, and they're only doing it because it looks good, because that's the big thing right now. And those actions are really hurtful, even more hurtful than allies who make a mistake. And that's the difference between performative activism and, trip up as an ally. When you make a trip up as an ally, it's unintended, that you actually were trying to lift up the work, but that, you just messed up in the way you did it. With performative activism, you're only doing it for other people to be like, you're a good person. They're not racist. They're not, discriminatory. They put on a Black Lives Matter shirt, or they put on, a Trans Lives Matter shirt, or they put on a Pride shirt and are wearing rainbows. Of course, they're an ally, but actually it's not injected in their heart. And that's what performative activism is. And that hurts differently and actually hurts and frustrates more. Michaela, if we can go to the next slide. Another video. We're going to show what performative allyship is.
What would you do for a comeback bar?
We don't need fake people. We need people who are honest and true and can help us. Performative allyship is when, you go to all of these happy events like gay pride, heck, even in like a gay club, and you say, oh my gosh, I love LGBTQ people. And then, when the serious stuff happens and we need people out there like in the streets protesting or writing to senators, if you're not there too, then you're not really an ally to us.
Performative allyship looks like reaping the benefits of queerness, like going to gay parades and then not sending me a text when horrific incidents like Pulse happened. This was especially something that I struggled with after the horrific and violent incident that occurred in Orlando. I was really struggling to breathe. I was viscerally shaken, and I had all these friends that I had planned to go to the Pride Parade with, and none of them texted me asking me if I was okay, and I think that's what performative allyship is.
Performative allyship is doing something for showmanship and for credit. It's easy to retweet something that may give the idea that you're an ally, but being an ally means being able to engage, being able to act, and being able to listen.
A lot of people stick to this hashtag activism. They'll post love is love, but if you're not doing anything to make that statement reality, then it's truly just 3 words. We need people who are there, on the computer and off of it. You have to be there for the good and the bad. You can't just be there when it's most convenient for you, because we don't have a choice.
Thank you, Michaela. We can go to the next slide. So, what does well-intended but poor allyship look like? We can go through these, ladies.
Being quick to marginalize someone else's experience.
Yeah, and that is basically saying, someone coming to you and saying, you know what, like, Professor so-and-so said this, and that was not okay. And for it to be dismissed as, and they just, they were just using poor language. They didn't mean it. You don't know what the impact of those words are on that person because you are not that person. You're not experiencing that type of discrimination. You don't have to consider the impact of what that discrimination looks like in the reality of your life. And so when someone comes to you and says, this is harmful to me because, you know, when you just say, not a big deal, not really something you should be worried about, you know, they didn't mean it, you're marginalizing and diminishing what their experience is. Next one.
Not taking the time to do their own research and expecting the oppressed to educate.
Yeah, this is happening a whole lot, you know, because, you know, people are wanting to be informed and wanting to know. They're like, hey, black girl in my class, teach me about all the black girls in the world, right? Instead of taking the time to do their own research, reading on their own, figuring out, and it's okay to ask, I heard this term, what does that mean to you? That can be okay. But don't expect if the person's like, I ain't got time for that right now, because the reality is that we deal with this every day, all day, right? And sometimes I just want to have a drink. Sometimes I just want to chill. I just want to laugh with my girls. I don't want to think about the systemic racism or the sexism or the bigotry that I have to think about all the time. Sometimes you want to lay that down. And just because you're choosing in that moment to want to be educated in this way doesn't mean that it's my responsibility to ensure that you're educated. And so, you know, you've got to do your own research and not expect people of color or trans community or LGBTQIA community be the one to teach you all the time about what they're going through and what they've navigated through, because that's not their job to do. Next.
Choosing not to speak up.
Yeah. If you are an ally and you see something happening, you see someone being harmed, you see language being used or an action being done, to just sit there and look at it and not say, not okay, you know, that's a way of using privilege, you know, like I don't always want to be the one saying it. If my ally peer, you know, one of the best examples is like my children in school. You know, there was discriminatory language used to one of my daughters, and it was hurtful to her. And I really wanted to spend time taking care of my daughter. And I was so grateful to the white parents that were in the class. I were like, Nia, sit out. Well, you know, deal with your daughter, take her to the park, make her feel whole. We got the school. And they went and snatched some wigs at the school, right? And so, and I'm talking like 50 white parents showed up at that school and said, if y'all don't change the way you all navigate with students of color, we have a problem. And that space allowed me to be a mama when I want to be a mama. And that is true good allyship of speaking up when they saw something that was harmful and wrong. Next one.
Responding poorly when held accountable or challenged.
Yeah, that happens all the time, doesn't it, ladies? Does anybody have an example of when this has happened to them? Michaela, Rebecca, Chanel? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
I think generally when you call somebody out, their first reaction is to be defensive and say, you know what I meant, or you know me, and not really accept what they said or did was wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And how does that make you feel?
I guess if you're not willing to accept or what you did was wrong, or you can't handle being challenged, it'll probably make me want to not be around you or not deal with you as a person.
What about the next one?
Executing initiatives of change without the oppressed people at the table.
What does that mean to you, Rebecca?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind to me is kind of just like people that are making laws that affect people who are, you know, not always included. They're making laws for people that aren't always at the table, and I think that doesn't always benefit the people that need it the most.
Yeah. What about the next one?
Giving advice from a place of privilege.
What does that say to you, Chanel?
I think it just means like the intentions are good sometimes, like generally, but people fail to try to put themselves in your shoes or see it from your perspective. And so it does more harm than good.
That's real. You're taking this last one, Michaela?
Yes, believing that being loving and kind are enough.
Is love enough, Michaela?
Love is never enough.
Oh, why? Why? You know, I'm an ally though. I'm hugging all the people. I have my best friend, you know, is trans. You know, I'm doing it right because I love. Why is that not enough?
I don't think love is enough to make any type of relationship work, whether that be romantic or platonic. You know, if you're going to be an ally, you have to take it as a verb. You have to take action, and you have to do things that show that love for it to really matter.
What if it makes me uncomfortable?
I think the things that we experience as marginalized groups are uncomfortable on a daily basis. So if you're not willing to be uncomfortable for that moment, you have to question whether or not you're truly an ally.
Thank you. Can we go on to the next slide? So what does good allyship look like? How do we get these big happy smiles when we are in rooms and spaces with allies? You know, this is not a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination, but these are things that we can do to make sure that we are in good spaces to be good allies to people. And so ladies, I'm gonna ask each one of y'all to take one.
So amplify. Many women and minorities in the office are familiar with having their ideas minimized, rejected, or ignored. When a person of color has a good idea and it seems like it's been ignored, you can be an ally by repeating it and giving them credit. Although this may seem small, giving your clear support can make a big difference in creating change within your office environment.
Michaela, what are spaces, like how do you feel like when your ideas are just like diminished or taken, and how do you feel when someone's like, dope idea, Michaela, you know, we can try that, we can do that, or you hear something and you're like, that was my idea, and like, yeah, Michaela came up with that. How did each of those make you feel?
I guess it would make me feel seen and heard, and that what I'm doing or saying is valued, you know, and that they appreciate what I'm doing in that sense.
Who's next?
Listen. This may seem like a no-brainer, but listening is one of the easiest and biggest ways you can be of service to your peers who are people of color. Letting them know you can be a safe, loyal, and trustworthy confidant is an invaluable form of support in any space. Listening to these problems and validating them is a form of solidarity. Just because you haven't seen problematic behavior happening in the office or classroom yourself doesn't mean it's not happening.
What does that mean to you, Rebecca? And how does it feel when someone actually does that?
I mean, it's something I appreciate, I guess, like people just, it's like, it seems so small, but people really don't listen a lot of times. When they think they do, there's usually like but you know, when you're saying how you feel. And so I think to actually have someone listen just feels good. Like you feel validated.
Chanel?
Inform yourself. Informing yourself is one of the most important parts of being an ally. By staying up to date with the current political climate and its painful history, you allow your colleagues or friends to feel less alienated. For many people of color, it can be exhausting feeling the need to regularly explain the history and motives behind the civil rights movement.
Yeah, Chanel, let's talk about this.
I think this is one of the most important parts because in anything you take on in life, it's important to not really put the brunt of the work off on the other person. So if you want to come in and be an ally and contribute or support them in a way, then you need to take up a lot of your time educating yourself. And because if it's the other way around, you're not really actively working towards trying to support them in the best way possible. And it can be kind of draining to always have to try to educate them. So I think it's really important to try to inform yourself as much as possible.
Yeah. Ladies, I'm gonna ask all of you, like when someone is listening to you and they've come and they're like, I've already done the work and the research and I'm not expecting you to be the one to tell me, and they're amplifying your work and your ideas, and they come to you and how do you consider them to be good allies, and what does it feel like to have good allies around you?
I think having good allies around you creates a safe space, and it allows you to, for a moment around those people, not have to like pretend to be something else. You feel seen for what you are and who you are, and you can continue to be that person comfortably.
Yeah. Rebecca, Chanel?
I think for me, it also, I agree with Michaela, and I feel like it also just kind of creates a sense of hope, like by having actual allies, you feel like you'll see change eventually, so yeah, I think it creates hope.
Yeah. Bring us home, Chanel.
I agree with what they both said, because it does give you a sense of hope, and they can obviously, as an ally, get you into spaces that you may not be able to get into to complete whatever endeavor you're trying to do. But also, like you said, it just feels good because you can tell when an ally is around you and it's really injected into their heart. And so you want those genuine people around to be able to support you in that way. It's just a positive feeling, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for sharing. Michaela, we can go to the next slide. So what are the action steps that we can take? Ladies, we're going to popcorn this and talk about what are the actual actions aside from like, okay, those are things that are what means good allies, but how do you get there? How do you actually be and do all of those things that we just talked about? So ladies, I'm going to let you guys take it away.
So temper the knee-jerk reaction to be offended and do a little research to educate yourself. Actively participate in diversifying media and your own media intake to include Black voices. Teach our children about race.
It's supposed to be your, that was my mistake. Next.
Talk to Black people, but don't think they represent all Black people, Black friends. Make an effort to diversify your social spheres. Stop making an anecdotal self-experience. I've been there too. Discount what we're learning about a Black person's story or experience. Start and encourage dialogues across differences with white peers.
Use your privilege and your physical and monetary resources to support Black people, issues, businesses, and projects. Understand that Black people face struggles that we do not. Be intolerant of intolerance. Confront your racism and don't be fragile or fall back on guilt. Be proactive about inclusion in your daily life, and don't think Black people must teach you about their lives in order for you to understand.
Thank you, ladies. Next slide, Michaela. So, okay. We've done a lot of work today. We talked about implicit bias and kind of navigated through how we get there, what informs us about our bias, and how that impacts our clients. We talked about what it means to be a good ally to communities of color, and that's inclusive of our clients, our colleagues, our friends, our communities, and everything out there. And now we're going to delve into a little bit about what the world really looks like. Our clients and also like, our colleagues, but our clients experience the world in a very, a different way than a lot of us. Even us as, with the privilege that we have to being able to be educated through undergraduate and law school, the world looks a little bit different. And so we're going to go through some of the collateral consequences that some of our clients face when they're navigating through systems that are harmful. And then we're going to hear directly from clients themselves. And so we're going to play a couple of videos directly about what clients say and feel and how the system looks like for them. Ladies.
Due to increased criminalization, Black women are often barred from receiving any government assistance to help with issues concerning our economic equity, domestic violence, housing, and education for themselves or their children. Increased entanglement with the criminal court system can lead to increased involvement in the civil arm of the justice system, including child protection agencies and civil protective orders.
The legal process does not take into consideration the complexity of Black women's relationships with their community and their families. As a result, prior proposed solutions have not achieved sustainable outcomes based on their needs. Louisiana consistently ranks among the worst states in the nation on equal pay for men and women. Black women in Louisiana face an even larger pay gap.
Black women have higher rates of undetected diseases, illness, chronic conditions, and a lower life expectancy than other groups. For example, Black women are more vulnerable to factors that contribute to stress and depression, such as homelessness, violence, and poverty. This contributes to the higher rates of depression and PTSD in Black women than white women and far lower rates of treatment.
Thank you, ladies. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide, and this is our last slide, and we're going to hear directly from our community. Some of these two videos I was able to impose on the slide, and there's two that I'm going to have to share from my screen so that we can watch those. But we're going to watch 4 videos from community of color, Black women across the gambit, explaining, where we are, how we've gotten here, and how it feels. So Michaela, we can start with economic inequity.
A House committee effectively killed a bill aimed at closing the pay gap between men and women in Louisiana.
When we get into committees in the legislature to talk about equal pay for women and raising the minimum wage, people who come to the table to talk about that, white men and white women against it. And that's what floors me. Yes, white women. And our white women in our legislature refuse to vote for those bills if they are Republicans. Women in this state make 67 cents on the dollar compared to a man. That's across the board, but Black women, it's worse.
We are one of the worst states in the nation as it relates to equal pay. It's mind-boggling to me that we even have to discuss this in 2018. The median income from African American women in Louisiana is around $26,000. That, coupled with a child or two, keeps you in a place where you can never get ahead. That's one of the clearest examples that I can give about why it's so important to be involved with the legislative process. We need to be at these tables to say these things. Do you know what it takes to be Black and female in Louisiana?
How did we get here? These decisions are rooted in political decisions that we have made as New Orleanians, as Louisianians, and as Americans. Wages have been stagnant for the last 40 years in this city, except for whites. You're living check to check. You can't save, you certainly can't thrive. And that means that their housing options are limited. The average median income for a family of 4 in New Orleans is about $36,000. Downtown is our economic core. This is a tourist-based society, so the French Quarter, the majority of the hotels, restaurants, the casino, this is the lifeblood of our city, and these are all jobs that don't pay a living wage. A lot of those folks can't afford to live downtown, despite the fact that downtown has a 30% vacancy rate in its homes and apartments. Frankly, the plan is, a lot of this stuff is built for people who aren't from here. It kind of feeds into this notion that somehow if we build it, different people will come. And again, it's completely wrong-headed. We need to be prioritizing the needs of the people who actually live here. We voted for people who have not put housing first. We voted for people who, in fact, excoriate people who need housing subsidy when we really all need affordable housing. Black women are also the face of this issue. Whenever people hear the term affordable housing, they think of a single Black woman with a lot of kids. And that stereotype is ugly and it is inaccurate and doesn't paint the full picture. Everyone needs affordable housing. And by embracing that and talking about that, we will uplift Black women. My hopes are, and we can do this. So it's not even a hope, it's a fever dream. Like it's what drives the work because we know it's possible. It's that we have a community that is equitable where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. We can fix this. And that's the first part. It's that the utopia is having those options. The real need is everyone needs to believe that we can do this. And everyone needs to expect that the folks that we elect, the folks that we empower, also believe that and are also committed to it.
Thank you, Michaela. Michaela, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with the next two videos. Here we go.
This city. They're the linchpin to hold a case. The district attorney is one of the most powerful people in this city. They're the linchpin to hold a case together, to build a case, to decide what to do with the case. It's up to the district attorney whether to just dismiss a case altogether.
There's insiders and there's outsiders. The insiders are prosecutors, the judges, sheriffs, and the outsiders are the crime victims, the mamas, the papas, witnesses, the criminal defendants, the formerly incarcerated. And the insiders want to make sure that those outsiders do not understand the system.
African American women in New Orleans are the most impacted by the criminal justice system, whether they're dealing with it as a mother, a wife, or a child. Our system is comprised of a lot of African American males, and which adds an extra burden to the females that remain out here in society.
I'm gonna go to the next one.
The age of 18 is when I got my first felony conviction, and the laws in Louisiana was that if you were convicted felon, you couldn't vote.
I have not been able to vote because of a felony that I got over 10 years ago.
I never classified myself as being a criminal. I never classified myself as, doing something wrong. I got a felon because of just holding a conversation.
As a youth organizer and teaching just how important it was to vote. I never thought that I would lose my voting rights. In the early 2000s, I was arrested trying to defend myself against a police officer. The judge found me guilty of assault on a public servant and sentenced me to 10 years in prison because I had people from the community who let the judge know the type of person I am, the work that I've done, my whole life, and that's what made him give me the sentence of 4 months and 6 years of shock probation.
I feel kind of like I'm in purgatory. I feel like it's like a time warp where you're taking me back to this time where I'm being punished for something, a mistake that I made when I was 23 years old, and here I am, 41, and I'm still being punished for that.
The felons voting bill. For 3 years, I fought compromising. They actually wanted me to change the bill so that it would look at people who committed certain crimes and not let them vote. And I refused to do that. The Republicans were getting messages from the outside. Don't pass this bill, they'll all be Democrats. Why should we do this? Because felons can be put on jurors. And they realize that a lot of these folks who are getting these harsh sentences of long-term parole are African American.
I think it has a lot to do, with me being Black and poor and just being someone that people want to write off.
I guess this great state, have a problem with, LGBTQ people, or especially trans. I can remember, a tall, very attractive guy in an unmarked police car. He stopped me, we was talking and things like that. And it was about 5 or 10 minutes He just put his hands in his pocket and then he said, "You're under arrest." And I'm like, "For what?" So that's when I knew about the Crime Against Nature charge.
That's a antiquated law that's been around for about 200 and something years that has truly been the bane of a lot of my community members' existence, you know, with trans women getting arrested one time and doing 20 years.
If you plead guilty or found guilty, then you was required to register as a sex offender. Just in the city itself, they had like over 800 people on the sex offender registry because of talking crime. I've never realized that voting was important until now.
Recently, Wendy has taken on this campaign and she's gathered a whole bunch of us together to try to get rid of the law. I try to lend my voice in different ways, but unfortunately, I am not able to vote.
Even though we just got a bill passed that now allows convicted felons to vote, I still don't fall in that bracket. I still cannot vote. You would have to be off of probation or parole 5 years before you're eligible to vote again. I'm working with Vote, Voice of the Experience, and we are working to restore voting rights. So Vote filed a lawsuit against the state of Louisiana because convicted felons was never even supposed to lose their right to vote. If we win that lawsuit, I'll be able to immediately vote, right away. So
after my release, which was April 12, 2012, I wanted more. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be more involved. I wanted to fight for the people I left, the women that I left in prison. At the age of 43, I voted for the first time. I voted for Latoya for city council. Fast forward, I voted for her in the mayoral race. My vote counted.
The most important thing was to give these individuals who were on probation or parole the opportunity to vote before they die. We're not through. We've got to be sure that women were able to take part in all of the criminal justice reform measures. And one of the most serious issues is that reentry programs for men were climbing. Reentry programs for women was very, far and few between in the state of Louisiana.
My reentry was not a successful one. I was homeless. I could not find employment my first 90 days out. I didn't have any clothing. I didn't have my own. And so society believes that, well, you get out, your family is gonna ensure that. Well, my family was in poverty when I left. Family was in poverty when I returned. I just knew women were in prison and nobody's talking.
Even if they committed an infraction and are behind bars. We've got to be very cognizant about the fact that, these women do need us, that, we need to make sure that they've got the right tools, the right resources, the right education going on for them. We've got to just make sure that they're protected. We've got to be the voice that makes the difference. And if we're the voice that makes the difference, then we can move mountains.
Michaela, if you can share that last video on mental health.
When we talk about health and economics and criminal justice reform and all of these issues, we tend to talk about them as separate issues, but they're not. My entire time spent in prison was for shoplifting, right? Which is so-called survival crimes, right? I was drug addicted. The drug addiction came from years of suppressing trauma, right? There was no mental health resources available to me. So I carried those traumas as a young Black woman who didn't have a lot of resources available to her.
who was raised in poverty, who began to have kids that she couldn't take care of because of the economics, who ended up in prison. You follow me? The health, the economics, criminal justice, right? Black women have suffered not only at the hands of society, but at our own hands.
What do we need to pay attention to? One of the things I think we need to pay attention to is that there's a stigma attached to mental health, right? Or mental health issues. And I think we as Black women have an important role to play in helping to break through those stigma and, you know, break them down and understand that vulnerability, being vulnerable and understanding emotional health is actually, it's actually courageous. It's actually about being strong rather than being weak. And I think for us as Black women too, there are stereotypes that exist that, you know, we have to be strong all the time. So I think breaking through those stigmas and being able to express that it's important for us to acknowledge that the whole person, the healthy person, includes mental health care. It includes taking care of emotional health. And then if we are able to address that, then, you know, we help to make our communities healthier overall.
I have a 3-year-old daughter named Liberty Promise Blessing. August 16, 2018, my daughter's father was killed. Just knowing that my daughter would never get to have her father throughout the rest of her life, and I have to explain the loss. She's so young to say what the outcome can be, but I'm firstly thinking about her safety. I'm also thinking about when things come up as in maybe a father-daughter dance or things where she needs someone to be there present, or her father just being a protector for her, she won't have it. Do we realize the mental strain that it's putting on a child, or the effects of the child in the long run? What resources are available? I don't want Liberty father being killed to just be a tragic. I want to use that story to advocate for just mental health services, knowing that it's okay to go talk to somebody or to just maintain a livable life, like a healthy life. I know that my vote may not change things immediately, but I hope eventually it may help a family like mine.
Thank you. And so that is the end of our presentation. I want to thank you all so much for being here with us. We can go to the last slide, Michaela. I want to thank everybody for being here with us. Oh, wait, sorry, not at the end. I totally forgot this slide, thank you. So as we get to the end, I'm gonna go back and I want us to reconsider the questions that we posed at the very beginning. You know, we talked about this as a tone setter, but I want you all to navigate through all of this and think through. And so, ladies, I'm gonna let you guys take it away.
Yes, now that we've thought about and we've been able to see how clients view the world themselves, what are your thoughts on Black, Indigenous, people of color clients? What are your thoughts on Black, Indigenous, people of color lawyers and law students? Do you think they're smart, wealthy, kind, believable, and capable?
Do you see Black, Indigenous, people of color lawyers, clients, and colleagues as one group? How do you talk to Black, Indigenous, people of color, clients, lawyers, and law students? How do you engage if they are not friendly?
What do you think when they do something that fits into your impression of Black, Indigenous people of color? Can they change your mind?
Yeah, and I want to give you all a couple of moments just to jot down your thoughts around these same questions that you thought about in the very beginning. How would you now navigate with Black, Indigenous people of color clients? And how would you navigate with colleagues, lawyers, other law students, judges? Would you give them breath and respect differently than you did before we started talking about all of this? If they do something, unfriendly or unkind that you consider unkind or unfriendly, do you associate that with them being, part of a community of color? Do you associate that with that being that individual? What does allyship look like and feel like to you now? And how can, and if communities of color, can they change your mind from where you started? The bias that we talked about in the beginning, and we talked about the ability for it to be restructured and reformed and reinformed. Can that happen with you? Is that a potential? Do you see yourself having the ability to navigate in a space where you're a better ally, where you challenge your own bias, where you challenge the bias of people around you? And do you see and understand the way and how people navigate differently? After spending the last 3 hours with us for. Thank you, ladies. Okay, now we can go to the last slide. Thank you so much for sitting with us the last 3 hours. I hope it was enjoyable and informative. I hope you were able to kind of reflect on yourself, communities around you, how you navigate with and for people that are different than you, people that look like you. I really, really, really want to again thank Michaela, Rebecca, and Chanel for and all of BALSA for putting this together, for forcing us to think about making this happen. You absolutely have to thank your BALSA classmates for saying this is what we want, and telling me, Nia, get yourself together and make it happen, and them doing the presentations. And I want you all to know that each piece that was presented, I gave them, ideas of what I would do, and they're the ones that checked it off and said, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. This is how we're going to do it. And so this is their work. And I want you all to be very proud of them for this work. I also want to thank Loyola Law School, the skills program, for saying yes and putting this together and asking me. I'm going to thank my organization, Citizen She, and the Black Women's Lawyer Collective. If you all have any more questions, any thoughts, concerns, anything, we've got a couple of minutes. You can put this in the chat. And you can also email me. My email is she@citizenshe.com. I am open here, willing and able. Hopefully we'll be able to do some more presentations for you guys in the future. Next semester. Have a great, I hope you all have a great semester, a great year. I hope that this and all this work informs how you navigate with your fellow law students, and I hope it informs how you navigate with clients and colleagues once you all graduate and pass the bar. Thank you all so much, and I guess we'll stay a couple minutes if there's any questions, but outside of that, I think we are all done.
Thank you.